Welcome again to Rewrite the Narrative, where it is okay to be curious. Please like, share and subscribe. Hit that notification bell for future video uploads and drop a comment. Today I want to step back in history. I did a review on a video about the breeder culture, and this lead me to just expand a little more. This brings me to the question, how did Africans become slaves in the Caribbean and in the Americas? Africa is very far away. Why did Africans got chosen or selected as slaves? Why not Chinese? The Western world is younger or newer than the East. Before the West, there was always the Asian countries with the Indians, the Chinese, the Middle Eastern countries where we had the Persians, the Syrians, the Jordanese, Lebanese. We had African countries, we had the European countries. Why did Africans get selected as slaves? And this brings me to the point that the country that was most invested in the Western world was Europe. Europe set out to enrich themselves through wealth extraction. So powerful European countries such as Spain, France, Portugal, United Kingdom and the Netherlands, they sailed the open seas in pursuit of conquest and capital. They sponsored ships, they provided and financed ships and people to travel to the Western world, and they would conquer the people that exist there and bring back the spoil. In South America, the Incas, Aztecs, Tainos and Caribs were Native American people that were conquered, and their wealth was depleted. The wealth was taken and brought back to Europe. These people were also enslaved and forced to work harsh work schedule and under very difficult working conditions. They were murdered, they were raped, they were used as like the spoil of war, and then they were also forced to become farmers. Ultimately, the wealth was depleted, the actual wealth, and also the people, they died. Europeans, they were determined to extract as much wealth as possible. As a result, they turned to cash crops, and this cash crop was not limited to but also include tobacco, rice, sugar and cotton. Now, they needed people to work. So they set their sights on Africa, West Africa to be specific, which is a coastal region of Africa. It's along the water, and it made it easy for them to purchase slaves because most trade was done in cities along water. So it was very easy to capture people and very easy to sell them along the water. So the West African people were chosen as slaves. Before they made that a decision, there were several things that they had in mind, or several challenges that they had that they needed to address. The people, the South American people were Indians. They were Native American Indians. Now they had similar features to other people. They had similar features to the Indians from the East. The features would have been similar to people from Persia. They were brown skin, had similar hair. So they had several things that they had to bear in mind, because those Indians that weren't captured, they were free because they knew the terrain and they went and they hide. And the ones that were able to escape, they escaped and they blend in with those people. No, they chose Africans because they are dark skinned, they are black people. And they also knew how to farm. They had experience farming the same kind of crops that these Europeans are trying to make a profit from. So they went to Africa, they purchased slaves, and they put those slaves to work. Now, Europeans had a culture of getting high return from low investment. Therefore, they want full profit from farming, but they didn't want to work. And that's where slavery came into being. They sponsored the ships in Europe. The ships traveled to Africa and purchased slaves the slaves were then brought back to America, or the Americas, and they farmed the land, and the cash crop, the profit that they yield, was sent back to Europe, and it was sold in Europe. Now, that was the tri-nation slave trade. It started in Europe. It had, the midpoint was in Africa, where they picked up the slave. The end point was in Europe, where the slaves were dropped off, and then the produce was brought back to Europe, and that's where it started all over again. The British people, they had control of pretty much everywhere in the world. It was the West had lots of land, therefore they needed a lot of labor. So after transporting over 10 million slaves, this took years. The slave trade lasted more than 400 years. But after transporting over more than 10 million slaves, they found that it is more economical for them to breed the slaves within the colonies. So they ended the tri-nation slave trade, ultimately cutting out that African leg of the slave trade, and then forced reproduction within the colonies. And that is how Africans became prominent within the Western world. They brought over more than 10 million Africans into the Western world, and then forced them to breed they forced them to breed. They were literally machines, actually. They farm land, they reap the produce, and they would stack everything, send it back. The only thing that they were not a part of was the shipping. They were not a part of the logistics. Now, ultimately, these people responsible for building America, or building the first world countries, because without slavery, without those 400 years of free labor, in the United Kingdom would not have gotten the Industrial Revolution that allowed its scholars, its philosophers, its inventors, scientists, and all of those people the opportunity to just sit back and innovate. The United Kingdom became the first industrial country because they had countries all over the world working and sending back everything to Europe. Therefore, people in Europe didn't have to work. They had no reason to really work. It was wealth. They had wealth. They had wealth in their own country, and they had wealth spread out all across the world. Now, this kind of economy before the Industrial Revolution was called agricultural economy and handicraft, because everything was done by hand. So slavery, the economy of the world literally was built on the backs of slaves, and servitude, because there was indentured servitude. There were people from other parts of the world that would allow themselves to become servant for a period of time. Then, as the time goes by, the contract expired, they became free. The only exception was that chattel slavery had no expiration date. It was hereditary. You literally inherited the status of your parent. The slave owners' children would have inherited the status of their parent and became slave owners also, and the slaves would have become slaves because of their parent. Now, there were also drawback to indentured servitude, because even Africans who sold other Africans would have traveled to the West to become free men after working for a period of time. But that was also very confusing to those people who saw black people as slaves, because slavery became an institution, and it became an institution that got ingrained or assimilated or intersected with a different institution, which is religion. It was religion justified the reason why black people were slaves. Right? So a black man who traveled from Africa as an indentured servitude, his punishment, literally, instead of sending a man to jail at that point, they would have sentenced him to slavery. And going forward, his children became slaves. That is how the economy of the world was built. We also should look at the fact that America became a powerhouse, a powerful country. It would have been seen as the capital of the world and of the Western world. And it was built on the capitalism style of economy. Is an economic and political system in which a country, trade and industry are controlled by private owners for profit, instead of having the state control the political process and the industries. This basically would have people invest and then reap a reward. It is all done for profit. Now this also brings us to a very important point, where there are some people who believe that Africans who are currently in the West should be very happy or consider themselves lucky that their ancestors were enslaved, because in comparison to those in the East, in Africa, in the motherland, they have a better life. And that is a very, very distorted conversation, only because if we look at some of the European countries, some of the Eastern European countries, they are not very wealthy people, and they don't have wealth that would sustain them for generations. They're essentially, some of them are very poor, to be completely honest with you. And those countries didn't have people that were enslaved, like cattle slavery or chattel slavery. Now, if you compare them to Africans, so Africans have a spotlight on them at all times because they're an example of poverty. But if the spotlight was also turned into some of the European or Asian countries, the truth would have been similar. The truth would have absolutely been similar. The world actually owe the enslaved Africans a debt of gratitude, because without those 400 years of slavery, the world would have never been as developed as it is right now. 400 years, nobody gets 400 years of wealth just for free without doing the kind of barbaric things that was done to the Africans who were brought over into slavery. That was 400 years of people just working for free, and then literally breeding new people to work for free. There were no machines that was as effective as slavery, because a machine got broken, they have to buy a new one. But if you already had slaves who were trained to be breeders, literally trained to breed other slaves into existence, you could infinitely increase your wealth. There was a time in the past when a person could literally mortgage their slaves. A person would choose to own slave over a house, because wherever they go, those slaves bring wealth. That's how the world economy was. There was America, which is, as again, this capital of the world, the most powerful country in the world, went to war, had an internal war, a civil war for the rights to keep slaves and to own slaves, not to free slaves. They had a war because the North saw how powerful the South became, because they literally discovered cotton. Cotton was white gold. Cotton became the most profitable commodity in the world at that time, and the country were split because the North said, you know what, slavery is inhumane. They also utilized slavery. It was a part of their institution, but the North was not benefiting as much as the South, and the North was actually England. The North was still England. You have New York, you had New England. All those places was still a part of England. It was the South that was uncontrolled. You could not control the South. The South was a part of England, a part of Europe, but they were starting to become their own people, and they went to war. Yeah, all of Europe had their place in America, but they went to war. And when they went to war, they won against the South. The South were very religious group of people who believe in their right to own slave and believe that it was ordained. They were literally a higher set of people. All of them thought the same thing. Every one of them thought the same thing. But this was a country that was built on the back of wealth extraction. The wealth extraction started from Europe, extended to South America, and then after depleting the resources, they came to North America. And after they fulfilled their role, they moved over to the Industrial Revolution came in, and then slavery became a shame. It became a shame more than anything else, because the country was built by three group of people, and if you wanted to eliminate one, you could just say it was built by Europeans and African slaves. But there are also indentured laborers who had a hand in the development of the country. Now, the greatness of the country cannot be explained without pointing or highlighting the benefits that the African slave brought. They provided free labor, they provided wealth, and they provided a renewable resource in the form of workers, because they kept having children. The reproduction culture that they promoted among slaves, it ultimately caused Africans to become really fertile. They had children very easily, much easier than the other people that lived in the country. Now, at the end of slavery, when they abolished slavery, they couldn't just bring the Africans back. The Africans became a problem, but they were also they had children much easier than anybody else, but they also were a shame. It was a shame. It was America's shame. It was the world's shame. This country was built on the back of slavery, but it was not a good conversation to have. And seeing an American, a black person, is a shame. It is a shame to a culture of greatness. Instead of highlighting the importance that they brought, they would speak of the fact that they are lazy people. They are lazy people with poor work ethics, all kind of things, right? Which it is not. That's not the case. It's really not the case. There are lots of topics that I could cover. Literally, it's a lot. It's a lot. I was looking into just the simple idea of how America was built. It was built by Europeans who traveled to the West to extract wealth, and they brought Africans. They brought Africans into the mix to handle the cash crop, the catch crop. These African Americans, the Africans, they brought so much wealth that it developed the country rapidly, and it actually split the country also, because they wanted the rights to keep slavery infinitely. Yet another group wanted to end slavery, because everything, the only way you can literally bring industrial revolution in is by ending a revolution. Literally end one era and bring another era in. There was a time when horses were a commodity. Horses were your wealth. People were wealth, but horses were special. Then cars came. They had to get rid of the horses, so because they need the roads to become free. They could just kill those horses. It's easy. They figured it out. They got rid of the horses. But then, how do you get rid of these people? The Industrial Revolution allowed for people to get machines. You don't need people the same way that you previously needed them. For agricultural economy and handicraft, because now you have machine. You don't need horses the same way how you needed them for travel. Now you have cars and trains. It's easier to get rid of the horses than to get rid of people, because there's no humane way of getting rid of people. And a new industrial revolution is coming up. I'm just giving an example here. The new industrial revolution that is coming up is where they're trying to phase in electrical vehicle. But we also see that we have vehicles that use gas, petroleum. How do you phase these things out? You cannot phase it out without destroying something that people hold dear. You have to remove all gas stations, and these people who owns cars will literally have to just park it. Can't afford to buy gas. Where will you find it? Even if you drive to a gas station, the gas station may be so far away, it is discouraging. By the time you get to the gas station and back, you already use all the gas. Now this is where strategy comes in. It is more difficult or almost impossible to get rid of the people that you use to build America, but it is also not praiseworthy to say that black people, Africans that were brought into servitude, had a direct involvement in the development of a country, the greatest country, and it couldn't have been possible without them. It would have been impossible. The world, by extension, would not have developed as quickly, only because after the Industrial Revolution, they created and innovated things that helped develop other countries into world power. These countries became even more and more wealthy because they were able to sell their development and inventions to other countries that ultimately became developed. And that is the contribution that these Africans made to the world. The world owe Africans a debt. They wouldn't have volunteered to do all these things, but they did it anyway. They were forced, but it was still done. Rewrite the narrative. Like, share, and subscribe.